know what? I want to welcome everybody to another edition of Real Talk, Straight Talk. Um, my very first panel, and I'm going to take all kinds of props to myself for the people that I've invited. Um, I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves, but first of all, I'm going to say a very special shout out to my cameraman, my technician, who's actually going to take the volume down for me. All right, so here we go. Once again, welcome to another edition of Real Talk, Straight Talk. Very, very distinguished panel. I'm going to have them introduce themselves shortly. This episode is called Racism, Homophobia, Islamophobia, Discrimination. The questions of the day is, as a community, where do we stand? And another question that wasn't on the flyer itself, but it's no less as important, is where do we go from here? So with that being said, I'm going to go right across the table to Omar. And people, if you know the backstory to that, we've been having trouble all day. Well, I've been having trouble all day calling his name. So Omar, Omar, I want you to introduce yourself and give us a little history.
Okay. So good evening, everyone. Real Talk, Straight Talk family. Thank you, Colin, to be here with your distinguished panel, Stephen and Patrice. I originally from Jamaica, moved to Canada in '97. I studied hospitality and travel at George Brown, and afterwards I left, went to the States, and I did a bachelor's degree, a master's degree. Then I came back here in Canada, I think roughly around 2004, 2005. Since then, I've taught in the GTA at George Brown, Seneca, Centennial, and a few other private colleges. And recently in 2017, my family and I moved here. So currently, I live in London, work at Fanshawe College, and I'm a faculty in their hospitality and tourism program. So really happy to be here with you this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. You know what? And all in my back of my head, I'm thinking, Chris. All right. Next up, I'm going to introduce Stephen. Stephen D'Amico.
D'Amelio, yeah.
See, it's my day.
It's okay.
It's my day. You know what? This is how I don't, and I said it earlier, this is how guests decide that they're not coming back to Real Talk, Straight Talk. All right. Stephen, introduce yourself.
Well, I have to echo Omar's statements and thanking you, Colin, for having us on. It's this is obviously a really amazing opportunity to be speaking to your audience and to be speaking to distinguished guests. So and thank you, Omar and Patrice, for being involved in this. So my name is Stephen D'Amelio. I'm the president of Pride London Festival, which has been a very interesting experience we'll be talking a little bit about today. I'm actually the first Black president of the organization, so that's a bit of a milestone for us. I'm originally from Toronto. I was actually born in Scarborough back in '84, so I'm a little older. And and I moved to Strathroy, Ontario, which is just outside of London here, when I was a young teenager, and moved to London in 2001 and have been here ever since. So I certainly call London my home, and I'm excited for this. This has been certainly something that I've been looking forward to. On my off time, I DJ. I'm an award-winning DJ. We actually just won the Jack Richardson Music Awards, or now known as the Four City London Music Awards, in 2019 for Best Club DJ. And I've had an opportunity and chance to travel across this country for festivals, so it's been an opportunity, an amazing thing for me. I've also an alumni of Western's radio station, so it's something that I've enjoyed over time. But that's a little bit about my history.
Okay.
All right. You know what I'm going to ask you? You ever forgot anybody's name?
Have I ever forgot anybody's name as a host? No, but I've mispronounced somebody's name a number of times.
People, I was hoping to get a little bit of sympathy. Obviously, it's not happening. Right?
So there's a Canadian DJ who's really well known, Deadmau5,
Yes.
and I for the longest time was calling him Dead Mao 5 because that's how that's how he spells
I remember because of
So yeah.
Okay. To my right, Patrice Robinson. One name that I actually got right. I've known him for a number of years. Introduce yourself.
Hey, you got my name right. Yeah, my name is Patrice Robinson. I'm from London, Ontario, Canada here. My background's basically in the arts. I went to Beale High School for art, and, during that time, well, actually, since I was young, I got involved into the martial arts. Being back then, I was, 7, 8 years old. I was the only black child in my school, and, I had to learn how to defend myself pretty quick, so I started taking up to martial arts and started paying everybody back, right? And I didn't know it was going to turn out to a career for me for a while, and, ever since then I kept doing it, and got my black belt, opened up a school back in 1997, got my third degree, taught for a few years, and as you well know, and maybe some of the viewers know, I lost my younger brother. He was murdered back in 2000, May 24 weekend. It was a racially motivated crime. And now, 20 years later, about 10 years ago, I joined a company because I didn't want to go back to teaching martial arts. I joined a company called Legal Shield, and I work from home, and I also have a graphic arts business.
Okay.
Yeah.
You've met the panel. First of all, before we go any further, we are all aware of the tragedy that happened last Sunday to the Asphalt family. Our condolences. This is one of the reasons why this particular show is happening. We took a hiatus just to, sort things out and deliver a better product. But with what went down, it just made it the right time to come back. And this is going to be the first of a 3-part series. The second part will deal with the same issues. Once again, racism, homophobia, Islamophobia, and just overall discrimination. Next week, the show will be on a spiritual aspect, so we have some pastors that are coming aboard. But right now, as we talk about racism, the reason Patrice is to my right is because of the experiences. One that I didn't even know of, and I'm going to talk about a little bit about, and I'm going to let you talk a little bit about being a black kid in London and being the only black kid in the school. And then we'll get into the other most tragic aspect, and then we're going to touch on that as well. Stephen, you know how it is. You've gone through a few things being part of the LGBTQ community. We in the black community, for a long while, we weren't as accepting. And then on top of that, entering as Pride, is it president or
Yes, yeah.
president? You would talk to me about a few things that happened. I'm not sure if we're going to get into that, if you
Yes.
feel like sharing them. But that turned into a whole different circumstances that none of us would have ever thought, because when we look at the LGBTQ community, we think of inclusivity, right? And you'll tell us that's not the case, right? Now that with Omar being here, he's moved from a small town to a small town, and there's some, there's always experiences, right? So everybody's here with a different experience. Once again, I'm going to turn it over to Pat. I want you to talk a little bit about what happened to your brother, because it's so important. Because when it happened, it was I wouldn't say it was a byline. They talked about it for a little bit, but not in the context of how we're talking about it today. First of all, I believe back at that time, it wasn't the black community wasn't as supporting in the sense, or wasn't willing to tackle some of the things that I'm hoping that we are going to tackle. We certainly didn't have a show like this where we could come on and talk and get that stuff done. So everything was in the white community. So it didn't get the justice that it should have gotten. So we're going to talk a little bit. So I'm going to turn this over to Pat. I want you to take us through that time. Talk to us a little bit about the whole your family situation. I know some of your brothers, right? And I want you to take us through a family thing and let us know exactly what was going on. what did you hope to achieve? Did you think there would be justice? Are you still looking for justice? All these things play, and I'm asking that because you picked up a legal shield. So I wonder if that was a direct consequence of your brother's terrible tragedy.
Well, 20 years ago when that happened, I had two apartments. I had an apartment at the King's Inn, and I was also moving into an apartment over on Rideout and Grand Ave. And I always got my cell phone with me, and this was probably the one time that I never turned my cell phone on or charged my cell phone before I went to bed at night. And I got a call probably about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, but I never got up to answer. I just thought it was one of my buddies trying to get a hold of me to, go party some more or something like that, right? And I got another call, and then I said, okay, well, it must be something important, right? So plugged my phone in, opened it up. It was my younger brother, Rick, and he said, you have to get down here. You got to come down to the hospital. Your vet just got hit by a car. And I was just like, wow. Called a cab, got down there, and just a nightmare. I never thought I'd ever see my youngest brother in bed like that with tubes attached to him and a breathing apparatus and stuff. And there was already people there and friends there. Obviously, my family was there, my mom and dad, and I was just trying to figure out, well, what the hell's going on here. And then I found out, and that a gentleman by the name of Matthew, couldn't even call him gentleman, an animal by the name of Matthew Rogers, had ran down my brother on Richmond Street, racially motivated, yelled out effing niggers before he did that, and left my brother for dead. And he kept going, and he wasn't arrested until he was up on Clark Road and Dundas Street. So it was also a hit and run. So that pretty much changed my life over the last 20 years. I developed some PTSD, and my parents, I feel really bad for. For me, relationship between me and my little brother was really close. We're really tight, and so is the relationship between me and my brother Rick. But for me, brotherly love is one thing, but no parent should have to bury their children. No parent should have to bury their children. For whatever reason, whether it's cancer related or illness related and stuff. But for murder, no parent should ever have to go through that. So, it's hard for my parents, because they have to spend their elder years and stuff still remembering and mourning the death of my youngest brother, Yafet. For me, it's hard. It's really hard. It's a struggle for me. I have nightmares all the time. I always go back to those images I had from 20 years ago. Being on life, he was on life support for two and a half weeks, and he died on June 3rd, and we buried him June 8th, just past 21 years ago. So,
it's a story that I can say as a parent, I can't even imagine losing my kids. I'm fortunate, as you know, one is our technical operator, so I'm very fortunate that that I get to have him with me. I'm familiar with your mom because I've been the DJ for the Congress of Black Women.
right.
Right, and she, a wonderful woman. She's always been part of the scholarship.
That's right.
She's always, every year since then, she's donated to the Congress for the advancement. So a wonderful, very, very wonderful woman. She always speaks. It's always a pleasure to, and so that gives us I want to say, and not an inclination, but that lets us know what your background is when you see your parents are like that.
You're probably referring to the Scholarship for Human Equality.
Yeah.
That was actually a name I came up with when I was with Mrs. Acano, who's my sister-in-law's mother.
Yes.
And we were sitting down thinking of a name for the scholarship, to keep my brother's name going, and they wanted to call it racial equality, And I didn't like that because I was thinking, I thought it was too small of a term, racial equality. What does that mean? Because usually when you're talking about racial and stuff, what's attached to that is something bad, racism or whatever. So we wanted to call it human equality. Now for me, you know, when I grew up and stuff, originally the school I went to was Simcoe and Aberdeen School here in London. Those schools in that neighborhood were full of people who were white, black, Muslim, Jewish, you know, every native, indigenous, every nationality, right, in that school. Never had any racial problems in that neighborhood at all. When we moved to Lockwood Park, when I was 8 years old, that's when being the only black, the first black family in that neighborhood, being the only black kid to go to Cartier, that's when I started seeing all this, right? Because it was like everybody else against me. I still try to find peace in my heart for them and, you know, kind of realize, okay, maybe they just don't know me, never seen somebody like me before. So I went through, you know, being called nigger and being spit on and all sorts of things whipped off at me, and it was crazy. And then, you know, when I get to high school, going to Beale, that was a multicultural school, didn't really experience too much racism there. And then, you know, I got friends, you know, I'm easygoing. I got all sorts of friends from all over the place that are white, black, Jewish, Muslim. You know, I really don't care what color anybody is. But after what happened to my brother, I started to see, you know what, not everybody's open-minded and as tolerant and as passionate just for human beings as I am and stuff, especially what Matt Rogers did to my brother. And that's when I really started noticing, it's like, okay, like, we've got a long way to go here. We got a long way to go. And I've got a lot of good white friends who are extremely empathetic. You know, I remember when my brother's funeral, I had a group of my white friends and a couple of my Italian friends actually show up at my brother's funeral before I even got there to greet me and my family. You know, which I needed that support at that time because I didn't know what I was going to do. So we've just got a long way to go. What happened to this family last week, a Muslim family here in London, for nothing. It's just I just don't know what's wrong with people. I really don't know what's wrong with people. We got a long way to go.
Yes, we do.
We got to fight.
First of all, I'm always going to say thank you for sharing what you share with us, because it, you know, was it 10 years later?
20 for my brother?
Yeah.
21 years.
Oh my gosh.
21 years later, 2000.
You know what? I've been in London for that long. I was here at the time. It'll never get easier, right? So thank you for sharing it with us. We're gonna touch back on that in a minute. I'm gonna talk to Stephen. Once again, we're gonna talk about the second part of the four parts here, whether it's racism, Islamophobia, homophobia, and just outright discrimination. So, you obviously being the president of Pride, you're gonna tell us a little bit of homophobia.
Yeah. You know, I do want to say, excuse me, I do want to say just before I start that I thank you for sharing that as well. It was very hard to hear, and I'm glad to hear that, you know, you had that support, because that's certainly, it's extremely hard to hear. So I just thank you again for sharing that. But yes, to speak about homophobia, there's certainly. You know, as I said, I'm a child of '84, so there's certainly intersectionality that comes up. You know, I'm a mixed race individual, but I'm sure I don't have to tell anybody that, you know, there isn't really, especially at my time, there wasn't really an indication of saying you're mixed race. You know, and when you go to apply for a loan or something like that, you know, you're not mixed race, you're black or white. So there's an element of race always attached to anything that you end up doing in your life as a young child, as a youth, as an adult. And then on top of that, homophobia is prevalent in just about every culture. It's prevalent in just about every aspect of your culture. That's has to do with education, has to do with generational perspectives. Um, there's a number of reasons, but my personal experience has been one that's been a bit of a roller coaster. When I was growing up in Toronto, it's a very multi-ethnic, multiracial, very open and inclusive city. Back when I was growing up, there was sex shops and strip bars and whatnot downtown Toronto. So it was certainly open to a lot of people and a lot of different, various different lifestyles that you would see there. And then, as I grew up, I moved, and of course I was a young child, so I didn't have any understanding of sexuality at that time. And as I grew up, I moved to Strathroy and came out as a young child. And to be honest, I didn't actually experience a whole lot of homophobia in Strathroy, which was welcoming, because in a small town you kind of have that image that there's maybe some thinking that's not necessarily as caught up or as progressive as you'd like it to be. It was actually very supportive. I got picked on more for race than I did for sexuality. And I honestly attribute that to, I think that people were they were able to pick on what was visible for them than what they may not have known. The homophobia started when I hit high school and moved to London here. Now, London is a very open and inclusive city, but has its underbelly. And frankly, what we saw this past weekend was an example of that underbelly, a horrific accident, a horrific murder that, just it's like Patrice says, why? It's extremely hard to wrap your head around. But when you start to take a look back, as I said, at the homophobia that an individual experiences, for me personally, it was more of a fear of not knowing, and thinking that, and this is kind of an old trope, thinking that because I identify to you that I'm homosexual, that means that you have to be afraid for yourself or something like that, which or as Eddie Murphy in Delirious kind of jokingly had said, that you kiss a gay guy and you get the AIDS. So there's just these tropes that unfortunately have kind of continued on, and progress and education was necessary. For me, and this is what we had talked about, I didn't, some homophobia came up as a young adult in high school, and a little bit of it came up as I was going through my 20s. The most amount of homophobia that I've received has been sitting on this board, and the same for a few other things that we'll get into. But and it's not from people who you would expect it to be. It's not from people who are not supportive of our cause. It's people within our own cause. I've had conversations with, and we'll talk about this, we've had conversations with Black Lives Matter and the police and a number of other institutions and organizations. And when you really start to talk about it, you end up finding out that the homophobia is within, some of these groups. And so there's, as I keep saying, and I've said it throughout to the media, as every time I'm asked about it, there's a deep conversation that needs to be had within the Black community about homophobia, within the LGBT community. I can tell you that there's individuals within our umbrella that feel like they have been ignored for a long time. Non-binary, transgender, a few others that have been sidelined in their mind. And this is, it comes down to, as I said, education. So homophobia has been, in my life, has been an issue, but not as prevalent as racism has been, which I think has been surprising. So yeah, that's my take on homophobia for me personally.
As I said, all these things we're going to touch back in a minute. Omar, yours is a little different. You've come from Jamaica, right? You've lived in Oakville, you've lived in London. One of the things I asked you when we were talking before was the differences between Oakville
and London.
Well, I want to, you know, express my sympathy to Patrice for the horrible issue with his family and having been suffering the loss of his brother. I'm a single child, and you know, one of the things growing up, I always wish I had a smaller brother, and to have that being ripped apart from you, you know, please accept my condolences, even 20 something years ago. Now, what Patrice and Stephen described, being someone who was born and raised in Jamaica, you really don't have issues of racism. You know, we have our own issues with class.
Class.
So it's total different thing. Yes, we do have issues along the line at what Stephen described, but me coming to Jamaica, racism was not in Jamaica. Racism is not really a concern for me because almost everybody looks like me. Okay,
Right.
so eventually when I came here to Canada, and after I came to Canada, I shortly moved to the US. I was attending university on a soccer scholarship, and then I really got a wake-up call into what this racism thing that I hear people talking about. Again, being from Jamaican descent and living in the US, you quickly realize that even though people would refer to you as African American, in many instances, the African Americans don't even see you as an African American because your experiences are totally different from them.
Right.
So those are some intersectionalities that we come into this. Now, my first experience with what I could call racism here in Canada, I was driving and a police officer accused me of running a stoplight. So this was the first time I was ever being pulled over by a police officer. So I did what I thought I should do. I had my license and my paperwork ready. He came, I handed it to him, and he was asking me, you know, have I ever been arrested before? Have I ever been to jail before? And again, I answered him honestly, and he kept repeating. And being the first time that I encountered a police officer, I didn't even know that what he was doing was actually wrong. So a good friend of mine from high school, who's a cop here in Canada, I called him and say, hey, guess what? I just got pulled over by a police, and the police is asking me these line of questions. So he got really upset and told me to tell the police some very nice Jamaican words, but I really didn't. So he gave me back my paperwork, and he said, okay. So I kind of left with a bad taste in my mouth from that experience. But a couple of years after, I was driving, and I think it was my my sticker that was expired. And yes, I got pulled over by a white cop, and he just said to me, hey, you know, your sticker is expired and you need to go get it you know, resolved. I told him I actually had it resolved, I just didn't change it. So he said, I'm just warning you because the next person who stop you may not be as empathetic as I am. And I'm like, wow, here you have one experience and here you have a total different experience. So it kind of balanced off things from my perspective. I remember one day I was at school and I left my keys in the office. I went to get access to a classroom, and I was telling the security guard that, hey, I need to get in there, it's almost time. And he kept asking me all these questions. Do I work here? All of this. I'm like, buddy, yeah, I work here. It's a bunch of students here, and the students are actually telling him that, yeah, he's my professor. And this guy contemplated, deliberated, called the office just before he opened the door because he didn't really believe what I was actually saying to him. You know, so my experience is a mixed bag, and I don't even let that cloud my judgment, because hearing stories of these gentlemen here, plus what I've heard from other people in my community, I know it's real. I just try to stay straight, and I try to, you know, operate within the ambit of the law. And I'm just hoping that by education, empowering communities, you know, we can get a lot of people who have different attitudes and feelings towards somebody who doesn't look like them, whether it's a difference in religion, whether it's a difference in sexual orientation, class, whatever. We just want to get everybody to see things on one pane. Well, the last story I'm going to share with you on this particular topic, I told you I moved to London 3 years ago. It worried me when I was coming here interviewing that I hardly see any black people. I'm like, oh my God, what the hell am I coming into? Now, I moved into a neighborhood on the northeast side of town. I moved today, and while we were unpacking, families would walk up to me and introduce themselves to me and say, hey, if you need anything, let me know. I'm like, wow, it's not that crazy as I imagined. And I remember the day after, my neighbor came with a bottle of wine. He introduced himself. He gave me a bottle of wine. Days after, I met other people within the community. One guy even came up to me and said, I have a pool at my house. I don't have any kids, but it's a community pool. He gave me his business card and he said, I want you to know that you and your family are welcome to come and use my pool anytime. So since I've gotten to London here, it has been really a smooth sailing for me.
Welcoming.
From a racial perspective, and even though I know my experiences really differ significantly to those of others, and you know what, just by talking with them and interacting with them, you realize as they get to know you, they accept you. It's maybe fear is maybe one of the things that are preventing us from getting along as we should.
In the hotel industry.
Yes.
I remember part of the conversation being that you were one of the few in a position of authority, not authority, a higher position, managerial position.
Mm-hmm.
What are the numbers like in terms of?
Well, I don't really have official statistics for
Well,
you.
and I'm not going to get it. I'm just going to talk about where you, in your environment where you've worked.
Mm-hmm.
I can't ask you to, and I didn't give you.
Both in the U.S. and here in Canada, there's very little people that look like me. You probably will find more in the U.S., more so than here in Canada. And I remember, I think I went to a ORMA meeting, which is Ontario Restaurant Hotel Association, and I ran and I saw a black lady came and handed me her business card saying that, hey, you know, she's a director of sales at a local hotel. I'm like, wow, you know, so there's not much of us within the field,
Yes.
but when we do run into each other, it's really a joy, because without even speaking or saying anything, we know what we're going through. And just by seeing someone gives confidence to that little kid out there who's looking and saying, I want a career in whatever field it is. And it's very important for them to see people that look like them. Yeah.
In our community, right? How is our community's reaction on the whole to what you went through? And now we get to the community aspect of things. So
Are we talking just the community in London? Or
I'm going
are
to
we-
talk about the black community in London. I'm going to get specific now. I'm kind of trying to find out where we are, where we were, where we are, where we're going. So how was the support?
That's twofold for me. Actually, it's manyfold for me. You know, as you know, on Facebook we have a group and we have a page that's dedicated to my brother. Without me ever saying anything, you know, people go on my brother's page of the group and they wish him happy birthday every year, talk about how much they miss my brother. At my brother's funeral, it was crazy. We were supposed to have my brother's funeral at Needham Funeral Services on Dundas Street, and at that time, around that time, I was teaching some martial arts and Eastern philosophy at Beale as a extracurricular activity and stuff for the students there. It went on for a long time, and there was so many people that showed up there from United States and places in Canada. I never met the person, but I heard somebody even flew in from Australia. And because it was pretty big news back then. And there had to have been easily anywhere from 3,500 to 4,000, 4,500 people at my brother's funeral. So the principal from the school says, you can't do this here. Why don't we move everything to the auditorium at Beale and there was still a lineup going down the block, right? So, and I still have it on video. So, and that support was obviously the black community, but listen to me, we had the white community there, and indigenous community, and Jewish community, and people from the street that I found out that my brother used to steal some of my mom's food and like go down and feed people that were hungry and homeless. People that I didn't even know, right? And every one of his ex-girlfriends would show up and talk about this, and then one said she had a little child with my brother that turned out to be a lie anyway, and stuff like that. She had some nerve to show up at the hospital. I couldn't believe it. So was there? Yeah, there was a lot of support. There still is a lot of support. For people that know me, that support what I'm going through, there's, that support has never stopped. But I do still get asked all the time, by my white friends, do you think racism's still that bad in London or whatever? And it's like, you got to be joking. On the flip side of that, I understand they don't go through what somebody of my color or somebody who's indigenous or somebody that's Muslim goes through. Right? They have no idea, so they can only empathize with it, or they can only go by what the stuff they're taught in school. Right? That's all they can go by, right? So I don't have a hate on anybody that is white if they don't truly understand, because you can't. You know what I mean? But I do also have a lot of white friends that ask me questions. And I'm always posting on Facebook, do you think this or do you think that? Let's have a conversation and talk, and that's really where it starts from. But now, sometimes when people are asking, you got to be careful certain people have to be careful what they're asking, because when you start telling them the truth, right? Now the denial aspect comes in. Oh, I don't think it's that bad. It's like, okay, well, you wanted to have the conversation. You're asking me a question now. Okay? I'm going to tell you the truth. I'm going to tell you the facts. I'm going to tell you my experience. I'm going to talk to you about what my dad's taught me. I'm going to talk to you about the stuff you never learned in school. All the lies and all the stuff about history and black history and all this sort of stuff. And with Christopher Columbus, discovering America and all this, crap that's, all these things that are so whitewashed, that even some people of the black community actually believe, right? And you got to do your research, and you got to educate, and you got to read, and you got to read, and you got to look at different sources. And if there's anybody who's, people like my father, my dad's going to be 98 years old end of July. You need to talk to people like him, right? Because they've seen it, they've been through it, they were there, and that's it. And the stuff that my dad's taught me, you're never going to learn in any history book. You're never going to learn it. So you got to have the conversation with people, and you got to talk to people. But people, I understand, there's a lot of, I talk to a lot of my white friends and stuff, and I understand where they come from when you have the conversation, when they say, look, I didn't oppress your people. I didn't have any slave owners. I'm not racist. And I actually wrote on Facebook the other day, see, saying you're racist, it's not enough, right? Saying I'm not racist just means, okay, I'm not racist, leave me alone, I don't want to engage in the conversation. You actually have to be anti-racist, right? Anti-racist means you actually do some fighting, and you do some work to fight against racism and get rid of it. That's really what I got to say about that. Did I answer your question, or did you get off on a tangent?
Listen, tangents are appreciated.
I got off on a tangent, didn't I?
No,
Sorry.
but tangents are appreciated, and the reason why I appreciate conversation.
But did I answer your question?
Yeah, more or less.
Okay.
More or less. I'm gonna let you.
I think I would like to jump in on what Patrice was just saying, because he mentioned someone saying they're not a racist, and he goes on to implicitly say that, a lot of people are very passive when it comes on to this. So I do see his point of view there. Last year, during the height of the George Floyd incident, I had a white friend here in London that picked up the phone and called me, and she just said, Omar, talk to me. I think the issue that really did it for her when it came on that incident in Central Park with that white Canadian lady and the dog.
Yes.
And she's like, Omar, just talk to me. I'm just going to shut up and listen. You know, and she and I ended up having like a 3-hour conversation. You know, I'm telling her experiences that we go through, and she didn't even have a clue, because again, as Patrice said, it's just one of those situations where it doesn't affect you. You can choose to say, it doesn't bother me, I don't care. But that's a very good point that you raised, that we want people to be active participant, not necessarily passive, because that's where real change occurs.
I also think that, just to jump in on this, I also think that there's a bit of a generational switch right now where we have people who are interested in advancing a progressive cause, or interested in starting a conversation, but a Facebook post is not enough. I get a strong feeling that performative action is something that is becoming more and more prevalent, and you know, that action of calling and picking up and saying, you know, I'm going to be quiet, I just need to listen, that's not performative. You know, those are the steps that we need. You know, saying the post, saying, you know, I'm not racist, I didn't have slaves, to me, that's the least you can do, kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So I agree with both of you that we need more action. We don't just need performative action, and that extends to, you know, every institution, everybody, every person that is interested in advancing the dialogue of that conversation.
Okay, so let's come back to the black community, right? Because there's two words that were
That was the question. That's right.
Yes. Let's come back to the black
I
community.
forgot about them.
That's all right. Forgot about it. Earlier we talked, you know, one of the words was education.
Yes.
Education.
Right? And 2, participation, right? As a community, are we too passive?
Well, I mean, I can tell you that my personal experience with Black Lives Matter has been a very eye-opening one, because I feel like it's on those lines of performative. There are people both within our community and outside of our community, but specifically within our black community, that are not taking the time to educate themselves. It doesn't matter where you stand on their platform, you just need to be educated in order to have that conversation. And I feel like a lot of people with the George Floyd situation, you know, I think we all know that George Floyd was not the first.
No.
You know, I was extremely disappointed when, and my goodness, his name is going to Trevor Martin? No. Trayvon Martin.
Trayvon Martin.
He was a child.
Yes.
You know, if that didn't start the conversation, then, you know, that was a bit frustrating for me.
Yes.
But I've had conversations, even, you know, in my position with black people, both on our board, off our board, about, you know, the race relations, and having deeper conversations and supporting one another. You know, for example, speaking to women about how they're viewed or how they're treated within the black community. Like there's a lot of conversations about education that I think our own community is afraid to have.
And then, you know what? Since I've started this journey, and although it's I'm gonna say it's been very short as opposed to other people. You've been in it for 20 odd years, right? You've been in it since you came out, right? Omar is new to London, and I've
Do you
been
mean
here-
dealing with racism?
not just dealing with racism. I'm actually going to touch on the actual, the talking about it, the action aspect of it, right? We've all had to deal with racism in London, right? Maybe not so much as, but it's been there, right? But knowing it's been there for such a long time, right? There comes a point where, like, I reached a point where I said, hey, wait a minute, you know what? Either you're part of the problem or part of the solution. We started EVOMM3 and the community aspect to try to be part of the solution. You cannot be on the sidelines, right? If you are black, you cannot be on the sidelines. How do you decide that, okay, I'm black, but I'm not black enough, or I'm gonna try to sneak away, or I'm gonna try to hide or pretend that things aren't there,
or I've
Right.
made it.
Right. So here we are in London, Ontario, and my experiences are, to a certain extent, because of being a small community, there are a lot of us that not sure what our next step is, right? I think on a whole, and I think it's part of the Canadian experience, maybe with the exception of Toronto and stuff, where we don't want to be that progressive. We don't want to be that active. And I'm gonna ask you because I see you thinking very deeply on it, and
I'll tell you what I tell my dad all the time and stuff, right? I respect we never got along growing up because I'm first generation Canadian, right?
Yes.
So there is a cultural difference there. But I'm probably going to get my ass chewed out for this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Look, black people as a community, as a nation, need to stop taking the time, all this time, to keep talking about what they can't do because what the white man does. That's really got to stop. I think collectively what we need to do is talk about what we can do as a community, stick together, back one another, and achieve some goals and things that we want to do. So it's a balancing act, right? You know what I mean? Like me, I've been running business pretty much since 1997. On my own. I've had some help from my dad. I've had a bit of help from different community or whatever, but I just made a decision. It's like, okay, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to do it. Nothing's stopping me. This is what I'm going to do. I'm doing it. Nothing's going to stop me. End of story, right? The fact that I was the first, black martial art instructor that owned a commercial school in London had really nothing to do with past history. It had nothing to do. I just made a decision. I said, I'm going to train hard, work hard, and I'm just going to do it. End of story. And I hope people that look like me do support it and stick together, right? But, the funniest thing is a lot of people that look like us said I'd never do it. Said I would never do it. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it, right? But I think that also comes with a mentality that's kind of been bred into people in our culture, people of color. You know what I mean? You can't do this, you can't do that, and all you can do is this, and this is all you qualify for. That's how they used to teach black people in schools and stuff like that. You're a black man or you're a black girl. This is all you qualify for. This is all you can do, and it's BS.
and so you're saying that we bought into all the negativity.
You buy into somebody's opinion and stuff. You buy into their lifestyle or whatever they believe.
I also think, based on what Patricia's saying, racism impacts and affect everybody differently.
Yes.
It does.
Yes.
He might have a very strong backbone, coming from a strong, being first generation Canadian. He had strong Jamaican parents that instilled that resilience in him. So that kind of gave him, muscle,
Yes.
emotional muscle, psychological muscle, so he could, stave off those attacks. For someone else, whose maybe economic or family social situation might be different, that is like a body blow, tremendous body blow to that person.
It is.
And it can cause them to doubt their abilities to say, you know what, I don't think I can do this because of all these invisible barriers.
Yeah, I agree that from my experience, I agree that there is always a viewpoint of looking back and saying, it's funny because I used to be in collections and that's my line. I used to say, I can't really help you with what you can't do.
Yeah.
I need you to tell me what you can do, because
That's
that's
right.
the conversation that we can have. I will say though, being in my position and experiencing things that I have, there's also an opportunity that sometimes you have to call it out.
You do.
And I'm experiencing this now, where there's sometimes that and it's like we were talking about, it's that backbone, and it's also that ability to understand that other people might be looking up to you.
That's right.
So, for me, I'm going to be very honest, I am really struggling with what to say to the public about my experience so far, because there's and it's the same in your situation or in your situation. You don't just represent yourself or your community, but you represent maybe another community or your business or the organization that you're with. So everything that you say, everything that you do is under that microscope, even tenfold because of your skin color. So I do agree that looking back and blaming is not the way forward. You have to look towards what am I doing and why am I doing this and what is my next step and how am I going to help someone up that ladder. But it also does mean that if there's something, an injustice or racism or homophobia that's being done to you, you got to call it out. But with that being said, there's a lot of comments that come online, and so you don't necessarily want to be spending all your time with haters, as the kids call it.
I'm gonna touch on the some of the passiveness that happens, right? So here we are. I'm in London, Ontario. I've achieved a certain amount of success. I looked down. I said, yes, I'm thinking I'm gonna help my fellow man, and then I looked down and I realized that maybe my fellow black person beside me is going to kick me in the ass,
Mm-hmm.
right? That is so much of a smaller town experience, and I say that because you have a harder time, right? And like you Omar addressed, the person had to be of a strong backbone, had a strong fundamentals. Pat obviously had, that kind of strength behind him, so he went out and he opened his own thing, regardless of who said, in our community said that couldn't be done. But everybody isn't a Patrice, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have those, once again, in the community that they spent years getting ahead, because in London, Ontario, it took you years to get ahead, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you look back, if you go and say to yourself, you know what, I want to help somebody, but I'm afraid of what that person is going to do to me, right? Then you get hesitant, and not only hesitant, downright passive about it. You're like, no, I'm not doing this.
I think you just have to think positive and look at people before us. Our own Marcus Garvey, it was an insider that actually brought him down.
Yeah.
For most of the black leaders that they took down to stifle the black movement, they had help from people from the inside. So why am I saying this is that you just have to say your contribution is going to make a positive meaning moving forward. Now, it might not resonate with that particular individual the same way it might resonate with someone else, but regardless of outcome, you just got to keep moving on, because as Stephen say, you never know who's looking up to you and saying, hey, I want to be the next Stephen to be head of Gay Pride. I want to be the next Patrice because I want to, start my own business and help kids. No, I want to start my own business and help kids to grow in confidence in terms of learn and helping themselves. So you have to have the progressive thought that even the same person you're trying to help might help to pull you down, but that's where your confidence, how you insulate yourself, those tools and resources that you have can easily get to navigate that waters and put yourself in a different path.
I'm just going to hold you for a second, because whenever you hear that, that's actually a phone call that's addressed to the show.
Okay. Okay, good.
Welcome to Real Talk, Straight Talk. Who am I speaking with?
This is Pastor Thomas. How are you guys?
I'm very good, Pastor Thomas. And
I have a question.
Yes.
I have 4 black men in front of me. And you guys are holding a wonderful job in speaking about your truth.
Yes.
But we're hitting a topic right now that is very dear and very important to try to root out of our community.
Yes.
And this is the part where we have to understand, instead of tearing each other down, to pull each other up.
Yes.
So I want to ask each and every one of you, what is it that we need to do to change that narrative?
What is it we need to do to change the narrative?
Yes.
Okay. And you know what, Pastor Thomas? We've actually got a minute to go. And so I'm going to invite everybody back next week, because there is so much of this conversation, and I knew there would be, right? That's why there's a part 2 and part 3. And I know, Pastor Thomas, I invited you and Pastor Green for next week. But I'm actually going to ask you guys, I'm going to shift you guys down. I'm going to ask you very kindly because there's so much that hasn't been said yet that we still need to talk about. That actually Omar has written the question down, and I'm telling you that's the first question that we will address next week, right? So right now, thank you for the phone call. I don't know, and you know, people, that's my boss, right? And my boss waited until 2 minutes to go, right, to put us on the spot, right?
Well, I was listening to you guys, and I was getting right into it, and then when
Yes.
Preston hit right into that, he just pushed that button that I wanted to be pushed.
All right. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all so
And this is the
much.
only
Thank
time
you.
I'll ever get to cut her off like this, right? I'm not paying the price for it. I want to thank everybody for being a part of this. This is a maiden voyage for us. We've had about 9 or 10 episodes. We retooled, and actually we were supposed to actually start back at the end of the month. But with what happened last Sunday, it just made sense to start these conversations, right? Omar, Stephen, and of course Patrice. Once again, thank you for being here. I hope you will join me next week. Same time, same place, a lot more talk. Got to send a big shout to my camera people, to the Ween, also to the Ween Community Center, who has graciously donated this building in which we do our filming, right? And to everybody else, you're gonna see excerpts, not excerpts. You're gonna see little snippets of this on Facebook and IG. Thank you. Thanks everybody. See you next week.
Thank you.
And this is what we call a blackout.